Hey there, friends. Welcome to episode 62 of Knit Talk with a Tech Editor. I'm Megan of the Unapologetic Knitter, and I'm a tech editor. 2 weeks ago, we talked about reverse engineering bottom-up circular yoke style sweaters into top-down. And there's been some wonderful feedback about people looking to find the same information about flat yoked garments. So that has been added to the queue. But I just have to share a comment that was left talking specifically about the long-winded nature of bottom-up flat yoked or bottom-up circular yoke style sweaters. It was suggested that we call bottom-up flat yoked sweaters buffies. And I think that's really cute. So I think we might have to start saying that because it's a lot easier. And then it got me thinking, so do we call bottom-up circular yokes buckies? But then what do we call top-down sweaters? Because sometimes, as you've seen me talk in this podcast, I trip over my words. It's a lot of words to string together constantly. So if you have suggestions for what we should call top-down circular yoke or top-down flat yoke garments, leave it in the comments. At the very least, it'll be something for us to giggle about. Okay, let's move on to today's topic. So this actually supports what we talked about in episode 61, just 2 weeks ago, when we talked about one of the major benefits of knitting a top-down circular yoke garment. The biggest benefit that a lot of people think of when you knit top-down is you get to try the garment on to make sure that the yoke fits you. So today I want to have a conversation about the best practices to try on a top-down yoke style garment to make sure that the yoke length is going to fit. So in a lot of patterns, you'll see an instruction that will say, that I guess I should back up and say, after you have finished all of the shaping in a circular top-down type garment, you may see an instruction that says something like, knit to X number of inches from the cast-on edge or to desired length. What is the desired length if you know that the length provided for your size isn't the right length? So if you've been here before, you've heard me wax poetic about how every body is different. Just because someone may have the same chest circumference as me doesn't mean they have the same vertical proportions for me. However, designers can't design for every body. We have to work with averages. So that's why there's the caveat for you to knit to your desired length. So let's talk about how to try it on to make sure that that length is going to fit you the way you want it to when the sweater is done and blocked. And although it sounds really simple, just try it on, I think there's a few things that get overlooked. So let's dive into those. As with any time that I share information with you, I just want to say that this is my approach, and you may have heard of or find other information on the internet about how best to do this. I encourage you to be really critical in your approach to this. Feel free to take my examples and try it. If you find other information that suits your mental approach to knitting and trying garments on better, great, go for that. I'm not saying this is the be-all end-all. It's just how I have found success. Okay, let's start with the first thing that I always make sure I do. If I know I'm going to modify the length of a yoke and there is room to do so after all of the yoke shaping is done, the first thing I do is look to see if there are instructions to make sure I have to end with a specific row or round of the pattern, and to make sure that when I am going beyond the underarms that I'm not going to be going out of pattern by adding length. In many cases, if you're knitting a circular yoke garment where you've got a lot of textural pattern throughout the yoke, the body is, I don't want to say more often than not because I feel like that's really dismissive, but very commonly the body will be a single color. So there's plenty of flexibility to knit to your desired length. If you have a overall pattern where you have to maintain from the yoke through the body without interrupting, make sure you look to have that final row or round ended on so you don't end up having to modify the instructions below the underarm just so that you could add that extra length. unless of course you're really comfortable with that. Then do whatever makes you happy. So the second thing that I like to make sure is when I look at the provided yoke depth for the size that I'm making, I make sure I know whether that length is relative to the cast on edge at the top of the collar or if it's relative to the bottom of the collar. If you are working a top down with a contiguous collar, meaning that your cast on edge is here and you're working all the way through, the odds are pretty good that it's going to be relative to the cast on edge. If you're working a circular yoke garment where your cast on is in fact at the bottom, this is so dark it's hard for you to see. There is a bottom of collar there. If this is your cast on point and the design is going to have you pick up and knit the collar when the project is done, I recommend picking up and knitting your collar onto the garment before you even try the yoke on. Here's why. There can be structure added to the neckline of the garment based on the collar pickup, and more often than not, a collar will pull in or get smaller because we're ribbing. So the fabric naturally contracts a little bit. That will also lift your yoke up a little bit. So if you are going to be trying your garment on to make sure that it fits, make sure your collar is in place before you do that. I would hate for you to go through this method that I work from only to go back and add the collar and find out that you're just that much too short of your desired target length. Okay, so there's two more things that I recommend before you try the sweater on. The yoke, it's not really yet a sweater. Okay, the first is, if you are someone who constantly wears undergarments under your knitted sweaters, whether it's a t-shirt, whether it's a blouse, or even just a tank top, I strongly recommend putting those on before you try the yoke on. While in most cases something fitted like a tank top probably won't make much of a difference to the overall fit, if you have a blouse, which can carry a lot of bulk in the underarms especially, or the sleeves, definitely make sure you have that on before you try on the yoke. You just don't want to run into a situation where you try it on your body with, say, a form-fitted undergarment and find out that you needed some extra room for that weight of the undershirt under the sweater. And if you are a person who wears bras, I do recommend putting on your normal bra that you would wear it on. For those of us who wear bras, if you know, you know. Some of us have stay-at-home comfy bras and some of us have going out bras. So I would say put on that piece that you will wear the sweater with most often, just in case any lifting changes how the yoke fits you. Okay, the next thing to do before you actually pull the sweater on is to place the live stitches of your yoke onto something other than your working needle. I generally like to use a Chinese knot cord, which is a smooth braided nylon cord. I will put a link to that product in the description below. It comes in lots of bright colors and in large enough spools that you can wind off a huge amount of it to use. The other product you can use is dental floss. It's pretty inexpensive. Most of us have it in our homes, and if you wound off a few yards of it, you might not miss it too much. Now, you can of course use waste yarn. I have just found if you're working with a garment that has a less smooth fiber in it, like this is a superwash, pretty tight plied yarn, so using waste yarn would be fine. But if you're working with a product that has mohair in it, or like the Surrey alpaca, which has that beautiful halo, you might find that using a waste yarn, an actual yarn product, as your temporary stitch holder may just be a little bit trickier to get out than you would like. But with that said, when you are placing your stitches onto that waste material, whether it's dental floss or that knotted cord or waste yarn, give yourself lots of yardage. You may be knitting a sweater that has a body circumference of 40 inches. So you would say, okay, I just need a couple more than 40 inches. But I think the thing to remember is before we separate that yoke from the sleeves and the body, the circumference of the sleeves is also on there. So I guess I should also mention, knitting is really stretchy. So when you pull it on, it's going to expand, and we don't want to lose any of those live stitches. So make sure you give yourself plenty of yardage for that sweater to stretch and pull without the risk of your stitches falling off. I tend to actually take the two ends that I have put through my stitches and tie a little knot in it so that it can't come off. But that's just me. Okay, so we have done all the things. We've knit our collar onto it. We've made sure we've knit to the right row or round that we have to end on with the pattern. We have our appropriate undergarments on, and we have our stitches no longer on our knitting needles, but on a piece of flexible string or whatever you want to call it. Now we can finally try on the yoke. So now's the practical part. We actually get to try the garment on. Make sure any short rows that you've worked are in the back of the garment. And okay, bear with me. I'm going to back up a little bit so you can see my whole upper body here. So you can see I'm tethered by my microphone. I may have to actually just stand up. Okay, so there we go. So when you are trying on your yoke, you're going to pull it on and kind of settle it down into what you think will be your normal wear of the neckline. The fabric may want to roll up a little bit. That's okay. That's a function of knitting, especially if you're working in stockinette. But the one thing you're going to want to do to test the yoke depth is reach across and pinch under your arms, bringing the front needle or the stitches in front of your body in line with the stitches at the back of your body. You're basically going to be trying to approximate that underarm. So you're going to be pulling the fabric around your arm and pinching here. You can use either arm, whichever you feel most comfortable with. When you do this, you're looking to, in my opinion, just barely be able to bring those stitches together under your underarm. You don't want them way down here. If they're way down here, it's going to be too long. I like to pinch them right up under my underarms. If they can just barely touch, I know it's the right length. When I block my sweater, it's going to grow and I'm going to have just a little bit of gap under my underarms. I've got about an inch here. Okay, that was kind of a funny little squat, so I'm sitting back down. If you try to pinch those two edges, the front and back halves of the sweater together under your underarm, and they don't meet, like you just can't, or it's pulling too much fabric across your arm so that it's really, really tight, it's too short and you'll want to add a little bit of length. As I mentioned while I was demonstrating, if you've got several inches below your underarm where those two edges meet, it's likely too long. When we block our sweaters, because remember, we're trying it on unblocked, when you try it on, you want there to be a little bit of room for growth because blocking naturally grows our knitting. So if it's already several inches below your underarm, you may find that once it's blocked, it's going to be too long for the style that you're going for. Now, with all of this said, I think it's really important to recognize that all of our tolerances for fit is going to be different. I happen to like a more close fitting yoke so that I don't end up with bulk under my arms, but if you prefer a larger yoke length so that the garment fits you more flowy, or if you tend to wear larger things like oversized blouses under your sweaters, of course, having that longer yoke depth is going to be more important to you. So I would say try what works best for you based on the types of garments you like to wear. It sometimes helps if you've got other knitted garments in your wardrobe already, and they don't have to be hand knit by you. They can be commercially knit garments as well, but I think working with a knitted fabric makes it more relative to what you're making. So if you go to your closet and have a knit garment that you love, especially you love the fit of in the yoke, it doesn't hurt to sit down and measure that. Then you can relate that yoke length to the garment yoke length that you're making to make sure it fits you properly. Plus, going through that exercise might tell you a little bit about how you actually like your yokes to fit. When we knit our very first sweaters, we often don't know. We haven't studied the garments in our closet to know what we like. We just follow the pattern. And so the more garments you knit and the more time you spend looking at clothes that you have that you love to wear, it'll help you inform your decision on how you like your yokes to fit you. Okay, so what if you try on the yoke and it is too long? If you're knitting a raglan sweater like this one, where you've got prescribed shaping, you may have to go back to where the yoke length is appropriate and then a little bit beyond it and work some compound raglan shaping at the bottom of your yoke. Now, off the top of my head, I don't remember the name or the number of the episode where I talk about compound raglan shaping, but I will link to it below if you want to learn more about how to do that. Essentially, what you're doing is doubling the number of increases that you work over the same total target length to make sure that, I guess I should say over a shorter target length, to make sure that you still achieve the number of stitches around that you need over the vertical length that you need. So you can tink back to the length that you want and then some to make sure you get your increases worked over the same vertical length. If you are working a circular yoke style garment and you have completed all of your shaping rounds and then knit even to the length that the pattern suggests, if you've got length to simply tink back or frog back a number of rounds to get to your target length without impacting that final increase round, you're golden. That's perfect. If, however, you're going to need to back out and back out past that final increase round, remember that when you tink back or frog back to your target length and go past it, give yourself an extra 1 or 2 rounds. You want to make sure that that last round before you separate, I don't want to say you shouldn't. In my opinion, you probably want your final increase round 1 or 2 rounds before you separate, so that when you are putting your sleeves back on hold, you're not dealing with any funny business from your increased stitches the round below. Again, just a personal opinion. Just make sure that if you do go back and you go past that final increase round, don't forget to rework it before you separate. You just want to make sure you have the correct number of stitches. If you try the pinch test and the yoke is too short, you have really not a ton of extra work to do in terms of shaping. If you've got a circular yoke, in most cases, all you're going to do is continue to knit even until you've reached your target length. Knitting even simply means that you're going to continue in the pattern, whether that's one color stockinette stitch like what I'm wearing, or whether it's an overall pattern, you'll continue to repeat the patterns, making sure you end with the target row that you have to end on to maintain the pattern, without any more shaping. That's all even means. It means if you've got 100 stitches, you're going to continue working 100 stitches without changing that total number. If you are working a raglan like what I'm wearing and all of your shaping is done, so you have the correct number of stitches around the yoke, but it's too short, what you can do is just continue to knit straight. You won't make the angle of your raglan columns will change because you're no longer adding any shaping on each side of it. But if there's a particular pattern worked in those raglan columns, you can continue it. So you'll just work even between the raglan columns and work the pattern between the markers for the raglan columns. That's it. Okay, so that's where we're going to end it for today, folks. In a couple of weeks, I will be coming back with a new video. I'm waffling on a couple of different topics. I really want to get the modifications for raglans for people with broader shoulders out for you. It is a big topic. I want to make sure I get it just right so there's no confusion about what I'm offering in terms of information. But I've had some other questions about neckline bunching, and obviously we talked earlier about re-engineering flat yoked sweaters being re-engineered for top down instead of bottom up. So we've got a few things to look forward to. I hope you will join me in 2 weeks. Thank you so much for joining me here today, and as always, have a wonderful rest of your week and happy knitting.